So we are gonna watch the second part of This Is Your Brain on Trauma by Healthy Gamer GG, and now we're going into treatments and recovery.
Debilitating. Okay? And then there's also dorsomedial numbness, which results in like not being able to like do things like feel spontaneous love for your kids and all that kind of stuff. It's all super sad and super debilitating. CPTSD is a really bad diagnosis. Good news is that it can get you can get way better, right? So this is not, it's not your destiny. So the cool thing, and I guess we'll get into this now, is that we actually know we have a sequence of things that you can do that will sustainably get you better. Now, there are a couple of good things about treatment. The first thing to understand is that trauma is an adaptation, which means that you weren't born this way. This is your brain adapting to circumstances, which means that if your brain adapted once, it can adapt again, right? This is very different from something like having a genetic, two recessive alleles that result in a genetic deficiency. In the blueprint of what your body is capable of making, there is a problem. So until we get to gene replacement therapy, like there's nothing that can be done about that, right? Like the fundamental machinery, like it's like we're building a computer, but there's like no place for the CPU, right? And then like there's no way to get that computer to work. The good news about trauma is even though it is so debilitating, even though it feels like it screws over every dimension of your life, the majority of it can get better because these are all adaptations. They're not the core thing. They're the stuff that you've layered on top. So you can systematically go about changing that, okay? So how do we change this? The first thing that we have to do is rewire our physiology. Okay, so we go through this in a more step-by-step process in the guide. So a lot of people with trauma, and Vander Kolk is a big advocate of this. So he runs this place called the Center of Trauma, and they do a lot of yoga. So what we tend to find is there are a couple of key principles. The first is you have to be comfortable in your own body. And mind-body practices are very good at doing this. So what we specifically want to do to be comfortable within our own body, our body has the sense of, we actually have 6 senses, okay? The 6th sense. The 6th sense is not being able to see dead people. The 6th sense is something called proprioception. So proprioception is our sense of our body in space. So if I like close my eyes and I lift my arm, I can tell where my arm is. That's technically not the same as touching something, right? This is like a sense of where my body is. And proprioception seems to be really good at helping us rewire our physiology. So a lot of studies show that things like yoga and Tai Chi are very effective for conditions that have hyperactivity of the central nervous system. Or sorry, not central, autonomic nervous system. Panic attacks, high blood pressure, anxiety disorders, postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. Mind-body practices are really good at this. We know that mind-body practices recruit things like the vagus nerve, which is our primary parasympathetic nerve in the body. So when we meditate, our vagus nerve turns on. It slows down our heart rate, it decreases our blood pressure, it activates our GI system, it does all kinds of good stuff. So practically what I describe is what we really want to do is something called autonomic stretch. So the best way so this is important to understand. So remember that our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, has sympathetic and parasympathetic, okay? Let me actually go back to this. Does this work? Okay, great. So I'm going to show you all this, okay? So let's take a look. Okay. So our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, has sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system, okay? So normally what happens is this one is active about 50% of the time, and this one is active about 50% of the time, and anywhere between 45 minutes and 2 hours is the oscillation between the two. So the problem with stress is not the stress, it's that it's chronic. So when we have chronic stress, we have 90% activation over here, and we have 10% activation over here. So it becomes difficult. Then what happens is our body gets stuck in this mode. So anytime the body gets stuck, it loses flexibility. I know it's kind of like a silly statement, but so in physical medicine, right? So physical medicine and rehab, sometimes we'll have something called a muscle contracture. So muscle contracture is when you hold your body in a certain way, okay? And when you, wow, that vein looks fucking huge. Sorry, I was distracted by fucking, it's a real pity I don't shoot heroin because that's one hell of a vein. Okay. So this is why I love streaming. Like, when I'm like teaching at like medical schools, like you can't do that. All right, this is why I love teaching here. All right, so if I hold my body in a particular posture, I will develop something called a contracture. So a muscle can get locked into tightness, okay? So if I'm like sitting at my computer all day, the trapezius will get very tight. Your scalene muscles will get very tight. Your anterior scalenes will get super tight. If you want to feel how tight your anterior scalenes are, by the way, this is a super cool exercise you can do. What I want you all to do is tuck your chin back and turn. And what you'll feel, if you just tuck your chin back and then turn, you'll feel like this super tight muscle over here. So when our muscles are in a sustained contraction, they lose flexibility. So this happens in our nervous system as well. They get locked into a hyperactivation of the sympathetic nervous system. So what we want to do is increase our autonomic stretch. And the beautiful thing about this is that when you look at stress, okay, this is fascinating. You can meditate to decrease stress, or you can exercise to decrease stress. That's weird, because when you exercise, you're not relaxing. You're actually doing the opposite. You are activating the sympathetic nervous system. So the cool thing about autonomic stretch is anytime we hyperactivate the sympathetic nervous system, we automatically send a signal to our body that we are going to rest when we are done. So if I'm in a chronic state of stress, okay? So let's say that this is, the midpoint. And let's say this is sympathetic nervous system, this is parasympathetic nervous system. So most of us live over here. But if you are in a chronic stress state, you live over here. So how do we get things back over here? One thing we can do is meditate. Meditate brings us here. And then after we're done meditating, maybe we'll go to there. The other thing that we can actually do is exercise. So exercising will actually bring us up here. But when we get up here, right? So when you exercise a lot, what do you feel like doing? You feel like resting. So if I run really, really hard and my CO2 level spikes and my O2 level starts to drop as I'm increasing muscular respiration, my body is like, oh crap, we've run out of oxygen. Now sit the fuck down and rest. So we feel exhausted after exercise. We don't feel energetic, which means that once we hit this point, this triggers a signal in our body to go back down here. And then when we end up, we'll end up here. Now, the cool thing is when you do both exercise and meditate, you will get here faster. And if you do this kind of thing, it will actually improve your autonomic arousal. So it'll help with things like trauma. It'll help with things like generalized anxiety disorder. It'll help with things like panic attacks. You can do both. The key thing is actually oscillating. See, if I want to stretch a muscle, stretching a muscle isn't just doing this. Stretching a muscle is doing this and then doing this and then doing this and then doing this. This is what really increases flexibility. Okay? It's not just going like this and keeping it there. This in turn will lock the muscle into this configuration. So we want to alternate between the two. So as we rewire that physiology, our hyperarousal will come down. Second thing we need to do is reconnect with our emotions. Now, this is where the cool thing is that we actually don't have to reconnect with our emotions to reconnect with our emotions. Okay? Give me a second. Let me see if I can find this. Let's see.
Good thing I've been exercising.
I think it's over here. Hold on, you guys can look with me. Ah, shit.
Doing the right thing without knowing it.
Okay. Thank God I remember the word that they used. Okay.
That's great.
Okay, so conceptual emotional awareness refers to the ability to reflect on, interpret, and make a decision about an embodied sensation or emotion. Okay? So there are a couple of different things that we can do to increase our self-awareness. Where is this? Yeah. Okay. During this phase of treatment, patients have to develop an awareness and language that helps them identify bodily sensations and how different bodily sensations relate to different emotional experiences. For example, for one person, tension in the jaw in combination with a feeling of tightness in the throat may correlate with sadness, while in another individual, sadness may correlate with tightness in the stomach and a feeling of heaviness in the chest. By developing emotional awareness, patients can learn to identify precursors, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So there's basically 2 or 3 things that we're going to do to reconnect with our emotions. The first is just be aware of your bodily sensations. So remember, and this is what's cool about the neuroscience. Okay? I'm going to try to explain this because this is huge, but I don't know if I can explain it. So if we look at this paper, okay, what this paper tells us, where's table 1, is that different parts of our brain are messed up by PTSD. Come on, table 1. Where are you, table 1? There we go. Okay? So we look at table 1. Here are all the things that are affected. So medial prefrontal cortex, self-referential, let's look at the anterior cingulate, integrates cognitive and emotional aspects of experience, right? We have all these different parts of the brain. Now, the thing is, these parts of the brain have these broad functions, right? So the thing to understand about the brain is we used to think that like a particular part of the brain does a particular thing. But what I want y'all to understand is that regions of the brain are like letters of the alphabet. The way that they connect and combine with each other is actually what creates a particular phenomenon in our life. So curiosity or love, there isn't a love center to the brain. A love center, the way we experience love in the brain, I can just hypothesize based on this, is some medial prefrontal cortex, some anterior cingulate cortex, some amygdala, and some insula. See, when we combine self-referential, this is me, I am in love, and there's an emotional aspect, there's emotional salience. What that means is feeling this means this thing. What is the significance of the emotion? I have a sense of me, I have this emotion, I attach a significance to the emotion, and then I also have some degree of fear. Because what if this person doesn't love me back? And then I also have bodily self-awareness, because when they're around, I start to feel changes in my body. My body changes, I ache for you. I need your body. That's what love is. So there isn't a love part of the brain, it is a concert of different parts of the brain interacting with each other. Okay, literally, like if you guys have been in love, you know what I mean. Like your body aches for someone else. Like think about that from a neuroscientific perspective. You can't ache for someone else unless the part of your body that senses your sensations is aware of what you feel and here is active in some way. Okay? So now we have a problem, which is that these parts of the brain are shut off in trauma. Simplification. So the cool thing is that in order to reverse this process, we do not have to fix it. We just have to awaken the part of the brain. See, if we increase the activity of the brain, if we reawaken our dorsomedial cortex, prefrontal cortex, right? This is where positive emotions come from. All we have to do is activate that in some way, and once it's on, it will start to feel other things. We see this in clinical trials, and I see it in my clinical practice. I'm somewhat extrapolating here. So in clinical trials on yoga for trauma, just think about this for a second. What the fuck is the mechanism? It's not just autonomic nervous system. What's happening is we are activating this part of the brain through this yogic practice. I can't find the sentence in this paper, but even the paper sort of talks about all we have to do is just activate the part of the brain. Even just increasing your awareness of emotions and even awareness of your body. You don't have to increase awareness of emotions. You just increase awareness of the body and you will have an increased awareness of emotion. Why? Because some part of an emotion is physical. Butterflies in the stomach, tightness in the throat. So you can kind of back end emotional awareness through bodily awareness. Then what you can do is, by the way, I don't know if y'all noticed this, but we've been teaching all this crap for years, and that wasn't because I read this paper, it's because I sort of found this in my clinical experience, that especially for men, accessing their emotions through their body is very good. Okay, so increased autonomic flexibility, number 1. Increased awareness of the body, number 2. Third thing is articulate your emotions physically if you don't have awareness of them. Fourth thing we want to do, what's the fourth thing? Oh yeah, articulate our emotions. Actually attach language to them. This we go into in a lot more detail. We can't go into everything in all detail in the guide. But the cool thing is, remember, we have this problem of hemispheric lateralization, which means negative emotions are over here, or emotions are over here, and language is over here. When we have decreased awareness, decreased communication through decreased activity across the corpus callosum, right and left hemispheres aren't talking. What do you feel? I don't know. Frustrated, stressed. Those aren't emotion. Frustration is emotion. There's no emotional nuance. So in order to literally articulate your emotion, you have to increase the connectivity. So as I ask you, what do you feel? What do you feel? What do you feel? As you struggle to answer, what's going on is your neurons from this side are reaching over and connecting with your neurons over here. What do I feel? It's like hard. It's like you're reaching, trying to grab it. And even if you fail to say the right thing, even if you don't know what you experience, you don't know what you feel, those neurons are reaching. That's where the money is. So I've seen this a lot where people feel like the therapy isn't working because they don't see progress in 3 weeks. And if you're looking for the ability to articulate in 3 weeks, it's not going to happen, but the therapy is working because your neurons are reaching across the corpus callosum, bridging that chasm, and eventually they'll figure it out. And if they figure it out, then once they figure it out, it's figured out. You will level up your EQ. You will level up your emotional awareness, and that will be a neuronal connection that is formed. This is why I have hope for people with trauma. See, everyone thinks it's all about these temporary states, like I'm emotional. No, what we're doing is we're laying neuronal highways. And when the highway is 90% built, there's no traffic. But the moment it gets built, you can get a ton of traffic across. So what I tend to see when I work with people is that their progress is nothing, 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 boom. Nothing, 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 boom. Nothing, 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 nothing. So this is what we want to do. We want to utilize language. So as we discover our emotions, then that allows us to do a couple of different things. Okay, so we're going to go back to this person who's numb. Oh, God. Where's that quote? Looking for the one. Oh, yeah. Okay, here it is. So, remember this, where we say, it's a blank, I think about my kids and I feel nothing for them. I'll be sitting there feeling confused and numb and I wonder what's supposed to, it's like a dead space, right? So this is dorsomedial prefrontal cortex is not active. Now, when this person lives this life and they go to their child's birthday party and they feel nothing, there's nothing, they don't have a sense, like their identity is lost. Does this make sense? Because like if you think about what does it mean to be a parent, like I went to this birthday party for my kid, I planned it, I saw the joy on their face, I saw all their friends be super, super happy. They've been struggling to make friends at school, but everyone had such a good time that now their social like status amongst their friends is now improved, so that makes me happy. Now I feel like a good parent. But I can't feel like a good parent unless I can connect with the joy in my child. So not only does this person feel emotionally numb, their sense of identity is going to be compromised. So that's where once we start feeling things, we're going to do two things to rebuild our sense of identity. The first is there's a lot of dormant negative emotion which our mind has dissociated from, which still lingers there. And the reason we dissociate from it is because it's overwhelming. If we let it overwhelm us, our sense of identity will get swept away. So as we start connecting the two parts of our brain and articulating stuff, all of that emotional energy starts getting vented, and essentially the negative emotions that we store start leaving. If you do this process in psychotherapy, even better, because it'll go faster. As these things start to leave, then your negative sense of identity will disappear with it. The second thing that'll happen is you will start to be able to engage in positive experiences, which will then recreate your identity. So now when you climb to the top of the mountain, you'll feel something. And then you'll be like, I did it. Right? So in both cases, you did it. But in one case, you don't feel that you did it. And in the other case, you feel that you did it. You need that dorsomedial prefrontal activation to feel like you did it. Okay? Then what happens is once we awaken different parts of the brain, where's scan? I'm going to show you all a different paper. Hold on.
So he's talking about a guide. I need to check out this guide.
No, I can't find it. What the fuck? Okay, I'll just explain it to y'all without showing y'all the paper, okay? I'll try to find it later. Oh. Okay, so next thing is, what did I want to say? So the next thing is that if we look at the neuroscience of emotions, what we now know is that not all emotions are like the same neuroscience. So we have something called affective neuroscience, which is the emotions that relate to like the way that we feel about, the way that we feel about ourselves, not about ourselves, the way that we feel, let me start over. So we now know that emotions can be divided into two camps. Affective neuroscience are the emotions that are independent of society. So for example, if I'm hiking down a mountain and a bear shows up, like I can feel fear or joy or whatever, right? Like I can feel that. Like I don't need a human being. But if we look at human emotions, there's a pile of human emotions that require a social connection. Shame, guilt, pride. You cannot be proud without someone observing your pride. You cannot be shamed without being observed. You can't feel guilty without doing something bad for someone else. So what we've actually discovered is that there are a couple of different emotional centers in the brain. And these primitive emotions that reptiles can feel fear, they can feel anger, right? But I don't know that reptiles can feel proud. Like, I don't know if like a crocodile like has the social connection with other crocodiles to feel pride. When we get to primates and stuff, they absolutely can. So there is a social connection pile of emotions. Those emotions exist in a different part of the brain. They get activated under different circumstances. So once we start developing our identity, these emotions will arise as well. They will start getting fixed. Once these emotions get fixed, so it's not just a sense of identity. So now I built a sense of identity, and my social cognitive emotions have become active. So once these two things get fixed, now I can fix relationships. Because when the shame within me is haywire and not functioning correctly, it becomes very hard to engage in a relationship. My partner tells me, I love you, I think you're beautiful. And I feel ashamed of myself, so I say, no, I'm not. So that becomes hard until that part of my brain gets kind of cleaned out and normalized. Then I can do things like accept compliments. Okay? So then the last thing to get fixed is relationships. Now, in our community, why is this important? See, in our community, there's a lot of people, especially because today's a Friday and Friday's Relationships Day, who are saying, I'm struggling to get into a relationship. And outside of our community, it's not just our community, everyone's struggling to get into a relationship, right? Some people are, having sex and stuff. Some people are friends with benefits. Very few people are happy with their relationships. And people say, how do I fix my relationship? How do I fix my relationship? And what everyone says is work on yourself first. And then people get frustrated by this answer. Now I hope y'all understand the mechanism. See, this is where, like, when I see people, like, tweeting stuff, I can't say all of this. But if you want to understand how to fix your relationship, or if anyone you know wants to understand how to fix their relationship, then you watch this video. Because we have to understand that the relationship is at the height of what a human being can fix. It is at the top of the pyramid. You can't fix a relationship if you don't feel emotions. You can't fix a relationship if your emotions are dysregulated. You can't fix a relationship if your dorsomedial prefrontal cortex cannot feel joy and accomplishment. You can't fix a relationship if your sense of identity turns you into either a chameleon or a doormat. The best way to make a healthy relationship is to be a healthy human being. Now, this gets even further complicated because part of being a healthy human being can come through relationships, absolutely. But this is what we're talking about, right? So this is where people say, like, how do I, like, get this person to do this, get this person to do this, get this person to do this? And here I am, I'm talking about how to fix your relationships, and I've not given you one iota of advice about what to do if someone doesn't text you back. And I don't need to, and you don't need it. If the brain that has evolved for millions of years to allow you to engage in relationships, I hate to break it to y'all, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, there weren't all these guides from Dr. K about how to get laid or how to go on a date or how to set boundaries. None of that crap existed, and people got along. What has changed? This has changed. The activity of this, the function of this. So if you fix this, if you fix your sense of identity, fix your emotional awareness, because why do we end up in bad relationships? Because we're not aware of our emotions. When someone doesn't text me back in 5 minutes, I get angry. Like, I can't regulate that anger. There's emotional dysregulation. There are perception problems. We haven't touched on perception yet, but we talk about it in the guide. There's all kinds of problems. And then we'll have a whole video on sex and sex and trauma, too, because that's really important. Okay? So, complex PTSD. Oh, let me show y'all one last thing. I lost it, chat.
Oh. I'm somewhere in the middle of getting everything fixed. I think I'm pretty far, but still a lot.
There's something I gotta show you. Okay? This is, like, very important.
Like, the ceiling is very high.
Okay, I can. Okay, here it is. So let's talk about treatment. Okay, so we talked a little bit teaching PTSD patients with impairments in emotional awareness to identify their affective feelings early on in treatment and make exposure-based treatments more effective. So we need to understand our emotions. Yoga has also been suggested to be effective in treating PTSD, partially by increasing one's interoceptive ability. Here's what I want to show y'all. Okay. Further evidence for the latter stems from investigation by Hagenars, who reported a differential outcome for PTSD patients with high versus low dissociative symptomatology. Okay? So remember, dissociation is hemispheric lateralization, and remember that exposure therapy is oftentimes what we do. So let's take a step back, and I gotta explain this. I realized I didn't talk about this. So one of the treatments for PTSD is exposure therapy. So the reason that we do exposure therapy is if, let's say that I'm a war veteran, and when I hear a door slam, my brain, because I'm hyper aroused, triggers like we're getting bombed.exe. That's the basic problem in PTSD. is that we go to war and we hear a loud bang, and then our brain is like, I'm going to code we're getting bomb.exe. Anytime you hear a loud noise, fucking dive under the table. So now as I return back to life, I will hear loud noises all the time. Car mufflers going off, doors slamming, and now I'm triggering we're getting bomb.exe. So we get this hyper arousal. So one of the ways to fix that is to expose people to things that induce their traumatic hyperarousal response until they acclimatize to it. So as I slam doors over and over and over again, eventually like my brain will realize, oh, like we're getting bomb.exe is not appropriate here. We don't need to pull this up. And so exposure therapy is effective, okay? But this is what's cool. So whereas only 10% of PTSD patients with low dissociative criteria symptoms still met PTSD criteria after a trial of exposure therapy, 69% of PTSD patients with high levels of dissociation continued to meet PTSD criteria at follow-up. So I'll translate that for y'all if y'all didn't catch that. If I take someone with PTSD who does not dissociate and I give them exposure therapy, only 10% of them still have PTSD. So let's presume that 90% of them get better. If I take someone with a high amount of dissociation and a diagnosis of PTSD, and I just give them exposure therapy, 69% of them will still have PTSD. So we can conclude, not entirely fair, right, because this is science and you can't make conclusions like that, that simple exposure therapy doesn't work for people who have high dissociative symptoms. If you have complex PTSD, you're going to be further in that direction. So let's see what they discovered. Therefore, it is crucial before commencing exposure-based treatments to assess the level of emotional overmodulation and provide interventions to reduce such symptomatic responses in trauma-related stimuli. Okay? So basically what this talks about STARE, which is a trauma treatment program. But basically what I'm trying to tell y'all is that, see, in Western medicine, we think that there is a diagnosis, and diagnosis has treatment. If you've got bipolar disorder, take this medication. If you've got ADHD, take this medication, it'll fix it. If you've got PTSD, do exposure therapy, it'll fix it. And we're not wrong to think that. Because we do trials, right? And like only 10% of people who had PTSD still have symptoms of it after exposure therapy if they're low on dissociation. But what I found with complex PTSD especially is that the more complex your presentation of difficulty is, we can call it a diagnosis or we can call it an illness, the more that we have all of these building blocks. And the key thing is to build one block on top of the other, and then you can get back to 100%. Most of y'all. I've seen it time and time and time again. And the reason that treatments don't work is because we're not comprehensive enough. Real trauma treatment, see, trauma doesn't just affect, there's not one part of the brain that's misactive. Your autonomic nervous system, your brain, different parts of your brain. Some parts are hyperactive, some parts are hypoactive. Your sense of self, your relationships, your motivation, your ability to, your impulsivity, your ability to control your impulses, everything is affected by trauma. This is why trauma is the great chameleon. So many people I've worked with have a diagnosis of ADHD, but they really have trauma. So many people I work with have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, but they have trauma. So trauma can look like just about anything. Okay? All right, so what we're going to do now, so don't give up, first of all. Like, things can get better. And the only reason that we don't think they can get better, so put yourself in the shoes of someone who did exposure therapy. They go to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist is very well trained and very intelligent. Says, oh, you have a diagnosis of PTSD, go to exposure therapy. At the end of exposure therapy, they still have PTSD. 69%. Because this one-dimensional treatment is not effective. In a certain class of people, it's very effective. And this is the way that y'all need to approach trauma if you're struggling with it. It's not just one thing. It is not fixing a problem. It is rebuilding yourself from the ground up. And you say, Dr. K, that sounds like too much work. It's not. See, the only reason it feels like too much work is if you've done a lot of work and it has yielded no results. Then it feels like effort is useless. Anything feels like too much work if you're doing it wrong. Is it a lot of work? Absolutely. Is it hard to do? Absolutely. But my overwhelming experience as a clinician is that people are into it. Once you start making progress, once you're able to go to your child's birthday party and be like, wow, I'm so glad they had such a good time and I feel like a good parent, it's like, you guys want that fucking vein? Like, that's like heroin in your veins right there. You begin to live the life the way that your evolution has designed you for. This is the way we are supposed to live. And it's like drinking water after running 5 miles. It just feels so good. It's just water. People say, oh my God, I don't like the taste of water. Or they drink soda all day. And then but this is the key thing to understand. Whether water tastes good to you or not depends on what your body is doing. Whether treatment is hard or easy depends on what you're doing, what you're getting out of it. This is the biggest mistake that we make. So don't give up hope. Absolutely go see someone if this stuff resonates with you. If you guys want to better understand these principles, check out the guide. We're going to watch a video in a second. Right, this is not a place where I would recommend coaching. This is not where coaching is that helpful. I mean, it can be for some of these things like paralysis of initiation and motivation and stuff like that, but like this is where y'all should see a therapist, right? A trauma-informed specialist is ideal because they will understand more of these principles. Okay? Now.
So he couldn't really give us a
Let's
how-to,
see.
besides just visit a therapist, right?
Okay, so
I think
we're
that's
going to get to questions in a second.
That's it for the topic.
I love Leaf Blower Friday. So do I. Fucking A, so do I. All right? So like, y'all, seriously, don't give up hope. Like, it is crazy how much we know about trauma. We've gotten so much better at this. The last thing that I want to say is this disturbed sense of self-organization.
So I've done a bunch of work
outside of trauma.
Gotten very far
DSO
without even knowing I'm doing the right
you
things.
Can't get a diagnosis.
Especially the physical.
CPTSD is hyperarousal, hypervigilance, all the regular trauma stuff, plus the disturbed sense of
the working out part.
Disturbance of self-organization. So what I'm noticing in the world today is that this disturbed self-organization appears to be independent of traumatic events. I'm seeing a society that is increasingly emotionally dysregulated, increasingly unable to tap into joy, increasingly easy to trigger a seizure of negative emotion, increasingly confused about their identity in life, and increased difficulty in relationships. So now the question that I've really wondered is that if you see this DSO picture, can you do these trauma-based interventions? You don't need exposure therapy, but can we do all of this other stuff? Calm down your nervous system. Increase your emotional awareness. Articulate your emotions. Improve your sense of identity. Reconnect with your positive self. Deal with negative emotional dysregulation. Deal with that amygdalar pseudo-seizure-ness. If we fix all of these things, can we improve those DSO symptoms even if you don't have CPTSD? And that's really what I believe. Right? That's the running hypothesis. Because it's too similar. The clinical pictures are the overlap is so strong. I can't believe that the same regions of the brain are not active. And if the same regions of the brain are active, we can do the same stuff. And if it works for someone who has such a severe diagnosis of CPTSD, it should work for you. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about yoga. We're talking about meditation. We're talking about getting in touch with your emotions. We're talking about articulating your emotions. We're talking about developing a sense of self. We're talking about forming a narrative about your life. And that's what we see in this community because we've been working on this crap for y'all. This is why I care so much about the trauma guide. Because the trauma guide is the guide for our community. And hopefully it makes sense to y'all now, like where I'm coming from. You don't need CPTSD. The right answer for CPTSD is medical treatment. But for all of us who have features of this, who don't have a diagnosis, we can still understand the basic neuroscience and address those things. Right? So the guide is not a substitute for clinical treatment. It is everything else. And that's what we're going to show y'all today. So if you struggle with initiation, we're going to help y'all. Okay? 1 second. All right, so I can't watch this. I'm going to like literally step out of the room because I cannot handle myself, chat. This is just too much. So I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to turn this on.
So it's going to play a video.
So we're going to watch an early cut, and then we're going to do Q&A when I get back, okay? Next up, we're going to talk about the paralysis of initiation. And a lot of people that I've worked with have struggled with this. This almost seems to be a societal phenomenon.
So it's like the first step into therapy.
Getting started. We know theoretically that there are other people out there who have goals, and they can wake up and they can sort of just do it. And then they also tell us, right? Like if you want to go to the gym, what you need to do is just do it. You just got to put yourself out there and just get started, because getting started is the hard part. But there's a large subset of people who struggle with just getting started. And as I explored this concept to try to help the patients that I was working with, I stumbled into the trauma literature. The original paper on complex PTSD uses this term paralysis of initiation. Now, complex PTSD is a little bit different from traditional PTSD, and we're going to dive into that for just a second. So in post-traumatic stress disorder, you usually have one or a short-term series of traumatic events that then traumatizes us. And then we develop a disorder, a psychiatric problem, as a result of the intensity of that singular trauma. On the other hand, there's a group of researchers who discovered something called complex PTSD, which is when the traumatic influence is persistent over time. So it's not a one-time thing, it's an environment that you grow up in. Or, once again, going back to the prisoners of war, these are prisoners who are in these camps for years and years and years. And what these researchers discovered is that when a trauma is repeated, that it messes up our ability to start our own actions. It seems to tamper with our very autonomy. And what they discovered in the prisoners was that these people became incredibly listless. Because if you kind of think about it, there's no point in getting anything started in a prison camp. There's nowhere to go, there are no goals to accomplish. It's all about survival. And what these researchers discovered is when these people got released from the prison camp, they still struggled to initiate things in their own lives. So we're going to dive into that concept in more detail because we've learned a lot about it since then. The first cause of paralysis of initiation is a loss of autonomy and a lack of reinforcement. So let's start with kind of a traditional household, let's say a healthy household. So in this household, you have children that kind of grow up and they want to do things. They have desires. So they go to their parents and they say, hey, I want to go to the zoo today. And so the parent says, okay, fine, like I'll take you to the zoo. If the child has an impulse to start something or do something, that impulse gets reinforced. Another good example of this is, let's say I'm like painting a picture, I made something at school, and I come home and I show my parents, I say, hey, look at this picture I painted of the family. And my parents are very, very impressed and surprised with it. And what they do is they put it up on my fridge or they put it up on my wall. At some point, though, if you look at a healthy, normal household, as a child starts to initiate things, that initiation is supported and reinforced. If we look at something like a controlling household or an abusive household, the picture is very different. Because in a controlling household, what I want to do is completely irrelevant. It is what my parents want me to do that becomes important. So when I enter the 5th grade and I have a choice between learning this instrument or that instrument, which instrument I want to learn is not as important as which instrument my parents want me to learn. And so what we tend to see is that the behavioral impulses, anytime I try to start and do something, those aren't necessarily reinforced. And instead of autonomy, I'm sort of taught compliance. The same is true, but in a slightly different way when it comes to neglectful households. So in the same situation, if I come home with a picture that I painted of my family and my parents are absent, or there's a babysitter there, or for whatever 100 reasons that could possibly be going on, something about my desires don't get reinforced in a neglectful household. Because as a child growing up, who is it that reinforces and supports your desires?
That's what I got.
So even in the case of absent parents, we see a common thread of when I want
but not
to do
only
something,
that, I would get
the
made
world
fun
around
of.
me doesn't necessarily help me do it. And in the worst case scenarios, what we actually see is that if I develop some sense of autonomy, I actually get punished for it. If I start to demonstrate initiative, which is one of the other things that we sort of see in the trauma literature, is that when we take initiative, some people will get punished for it. So I decided that I wanted to plan a birthday party this weekend with my friends, and I tell my parents about it on Thursday, but then they get really angry with me for not discussing it with them, not getting their permission. They're incredibly controlling. So all of my initiative kind of goes down the drain. It's all about what other people want. So this is the first cause of the paralysis of initiation, is if we look at the normal child development or normal human development, at some point our desires get reinforced, our autonomy gets rewarded. But if you grew up in an environment where your autonomy was not rewarded, where your desires were not reinforced, that is a lesson that your brain will carry forward. The second aspect of paralysis of initiation has to do with the loss of the future dimension. I know it sounds kind of weird and abstract, but it's actually pretty simple. So once again, as a child, let's look at the normal situation. So at some point, I start thinking about the future, right? If I have present and loving parents, they'll ask me, oh, what do you want for Christmas this year? Let's write Santa a letter. We're going to do something today that will be rewarded not just tomorrow, but a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. Similarly, supportive parents will take a look at your schedule for the week and sort of, even if you're in the 2nd grade or 3rd grade, they will sort of remind you or help you understand that, okay, this week you have these 2 assignments to complete, so we need to start thinking about tomorrow or even the end of the week today. So with healthy parenting, it's kind of bizarre, but we have this part of our brain that looks into the future and plans and executes tasks. This is the frontal lobe of our brain that kind of plans things out and makes sure they get done. In a normal household, this is a part of our brain that gets supported by our parents. But once again, once we move to a controlling or a neglectful household, that all goes out the window. So the first thing is planning for my future when I have controlling parents is a waste of time because my parents have decided what my future will be. In the worst case scenarios, like so for example, in my culture, there's some traditional Indian parents that will plan everything for their kids. You're gonna be a doctor, you're gonna be a lawyer. I had that conversation with my own dad when I was 9 years old. He said, we took me and my brother aside. I was 9, my brother was 12, and he said, one of y'all is gonna be a doctor and one of y'all is gonna be a lawyer. And then I ended up applying to med school, and people asked me, like, why do you want to be a doctor? And I said, well, this is the conversation my dad had with me. And my brother was older, so he got to choose first, and he went to law school. So here I am. And we all had a good laugh about it, but I never really answered the question. The point, though, is that with controlling parents who sort of determine your future for you, they tell you what you need to accomplish, they tell you when you need to accomplish it. You're going to learn the cello, you're going to learn the violin, you're going to do a sport, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, or you're going to carry on in your father's footsteps and you're going to play football. Whatever the situation is, your sense of the future gets negatively impacted. You don't get to think about the future and plan for the future on your own. And the same is true in neglectful households, although once again, slightly differently. Because in this case, if you're a 7-year-old kid and your parents are absent, there's no point in planning for a slumber party in the future. And remember that as kids, we don't really know how to plan for the future ourselves. We actually need adults to teach us how to really use our frontal lobes. They sort of train us to do all of these things, in addition to like walking and talking and doing laundry, and all of these tasks that parents teach us are also affected in a neglectful household. So this is the second thing that happens, is that when we sort of think about the future dimension, in a healthy household, thinking about the future dimension is rewarded. If I make a Christmas list for Santa, I actually get those presents. If I plan for a slumber party this weekend, the slumber party actually happens. But in the case of controlling, abusive, or neglectful households, this planning for the future does not get reinforced. Sometimes it just becomes neglected, so that I don't get rewarded for thinking about the future. But in the harshest cases, I actually get punished. So since I have all these plans of I want this for Christmas or I want my friends to come over this weekend, but when Friday rolls around, my parent has been drinking and they don't feel like having kids in the house, so they tell me to call all my friends and cancel at the last minute. And then I'm left with disappointing all of my friends.
Every
and
time.
So in the most drastic cases, we actually get punished for thinking about the future.
Always.
And this is the problem in each of these scenarios, is that over time, in the simplest case, these parts of our brain are not reinforced. We don't have behavioral reinforcement of desire. We don't have positive reinforcement for planning of the future. And in the worst cases, we actually get punished for doing these things. Because if you kind of think about it, let's say I have a desire, and then since my parents are neglectful, I make this Christmas list, but then no presents show up on Christmas Day. What is the lesson I learn as a child? Over time, the lesson I'll learn is it's better not to have desires in the first place, because then I won't be disappointed. So it's better to just not want anything at all. It's better to not try to do anything. It's better to put forth no effort whatsoever, because at the end of the day, I'm living my life reactively. I have no sense of autonomy or control. And if I try to exert control, if I am stupid enough to want things, then that will actually hurt and lead to disappointment. And then you learn a very dangerous lesson, which is wanting things and thinking about the future is painful and harmful. And once you learn this lesson, this leads to the paralysis of initiation later in life. Now, there's another challenge that we kind of run into that keeps people who grow up in these kinds of environments from really initiating things, and that is a reliance on perfectionism. So there's a group of people that I've worked with, and this group, by the way, is becoming increasingly common because, once again, a lot of people grow up in scenarios like this, where they can't get started until it's perfect. So I'm not going to apply to college unless I know I can get into Harvard. I'm not going to take this course unless I know I can get an A. I'm not going to even learn any skill until I practice ahead of time, even before I join the course. So if I'm learning how to dance, I'm going to spend 3 months practicing at home so I don't embarrass myself when I join the class. That is even for novices. So there are a lot of people out there that are very hesitant to get started until things are perfect. And let's explore a little bit about why this happens. So this too can be tracked back to trauma. So if we sort of think about controlling, abusive, or neglectful households, these households create situations that are very stressful and dangerous for the child. So in order to understand why some people become very perfectionistic and why some people can afford to take risks, we have to understand a very important divergence that happens very early in life. So let's start with the case of a healthy household. So if you sort of think about it, the world is objectively a dangerous place for kids. So if I'm like, let's say an 18-month-old kid, 1-year-old kid, 2-year-old kid, the world is a dangerous place. I can barely walk. I tend to stumble a lot. Things like stairs can be incredibly dangerous. But it's not just that. It's also things like when I get served food, does the food burn me or not? And this is where parents come in, because parents who are very attentive will protect the child from the dangerous world. And this is like kind of what we know. If you're a parent, you'll understand this, that your children will try all kinds of things to hurt themselves because they don't really know that the world is a dangerous place. And the better you take care of them, the more reckless they become because there are never negative consequences for things. A parent who's always caught when they jump off the bed will not learn the danger of gravity. So these children become very secure in the world around them because it's a safe place, because mom or dad is there to protect me from danger. So these children become more confident, they're able to embrace more risks, they can try new things, and they also enjoy exploring the world. They're very, very confident that someone is out there protecting them. They're not really aware that there's a person out there protecting them. They just know that as they stumble around, someone's always catching them and they don't get hurt. On the flip side, let's look at something like a neglectful household. So in this case, now the world becomes a dangerous place because there isn't a parent paying attention if I slip and fall. No one is even watching as I start climbing up the stairs, and on my 7th stair, since I'm like a 13-month-old kid, I stumble and fall, and then I roll down the stairs and start crying. In the worst case scenarios, even when I start crying, either the parent doesn't pay attention, doesn't care, or even will get mad at me for crying and will tell me to be quiet. So if we see households that are incredibly controlling, which also can be sort of scary for a child, because in a controlling household with very demanding parents, we want our children to be perfect, right? Don't spill, don't play with this, you made a mess, this happened, this happened, this happened. So very controlling parents will be very angry with their children for not being perfect. Abusive households also lead to a reliance on perfectionism, because usually what the child learns when it comes to abuse is there is a magical formula to avoid the abuse. If the child can be kind enough, if the child can be sweet enough, if the child can be cute enough or pretty enough, demure enough, invisible enough, sometimes these children can sort of figure out almost from a survival mechanism that if I have an abusive parent, there are some days that the parent is not abusive. And so then the child naturally tries to figure out what is the difference between the abusive day and the non-abusive day. And this is when they start to develop this idea that if I'm a perfect child, then I will be safe. And so perfectionism and safety go hand in hand. So if you try to do something in the outside world and you are not perfect, remember that this stuff gets baked in to your upbringing in the same way that you were understanding how strong gravity is, or what the sun feels like, or how many fingers you have. This stuff gets really baked in, and perfectionism and safety become one and the same. So this is another reason why people struggle with initiating tasks. They can be very, very afraid of doing something wrong. They can't afford to make mistakes, and they need to be perfect before they get started. And why is this? It's because the world that they see does not allow them to make mistakes. If they make some kind of slip up, and if they screw up in some kind of way, the world is a fundamentally dangerous, scary, and punishing place. And if we are wired in any one of these three ways, if our desires and our autonomy has not been reinforced, if our capacity to plan for the future has actually been squashed or neglected, or we grew up in an environment where we had to be perfect before we get started, all three of these can result in the paralysis of initiation.
Yeah, excellent.
Alrighty. So,
I'll check all the boxes.
All right, hold on a second. Yeah, so that's one of the videos from the trauma guide. And like I said, like we've been working on this for a while, and when I was making the trauma guide, y'all can hear me, right? Am I muted? Okay, no, y'all can hear me. You know, I was thinking about like us, and like what are the things that we struggle with, and it's not, and there's absolutely like clinically significant stuff. And I was also thinking about like, you know, if I could take all of my patients who have diagnoses of some kind of trauma or a history of trauma, and I could like give them a workshop for not the stuff that we do in the office, like nothing about, I mean, there's stuff about medication and treatment and stuff like that too, but like not that stuff, but like all the other dimensions of their life. Like how do you find a relationship when you have a history of trauma? How do you reconnect with yourself? And these are the kinds of things that like, you know, are not specific to a person. This is the common stuff that I would teach to my patients, which isn't technically like a part of their diagnosis. I mean, it's part of their diagnosis, I guess, but it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's not, you know, it's not about this relationship that this person has. It's about the principle of why is it hard for this group of people to form relationships. Okay. Yeah, so let's do some Q&A. So we've got time for, we wanted to save some time for Q&A. So we've got, I know we've like run long and we're at like 2:30 and we.
Okay, so I'm pretty far in, I think, of just getting better, and been for a while. I just realized everything and how it works and how it works together. I find it fascinating how well he just describes my life and why I think certain stuff and on what grounds and everything. And it's so easy, so simple. So I think I'm gonna just make a game plan for what I wanna do. I just keep doing what I'm doing. Honestly, I think I'm very much on the right path, and I was on the right path for a long time, and just now I see the signs. The fog is getting thinner, and I see that I'm on the right path. Seeing the sign in front of me that says you are on the right path. So this is very good, very reassuring. Um, just gives me positive feedback to myself and the way I was figuring stuff out, and it all comes down to your parents. I don't think I have like ah, how do I say? I don't think I'm gonna be a mess, or I'm gonna, it's only up from here. It just that all the past interactions that I have with other people, they went bad because of this, and then I just couldn't make it right, and I probably don't have the chance to make it right again because so much time has passed, or I lost the connection, or they got enough of me and blocked me. So that hurts. That still hurts. I'm thinking, well, what should I think about these people? Like, should I forgive them? They didn't know any better. Should I hate them? I got one-on-one therapy session with the BetterHelp trauma expert in a few days, and it's only like a 45 minutes session, I believe, maybe 60 minutes. I'm not sure. And right now, I'm asking myself how I'm gonna fit all of this in one session. Because there's probably gonna be only one session and maybe one more, because it's way too pricey for me. But as I said, I don't think I'm gonna be. I think I'm not hopeless. I just pretty much need a little bit of a nudge in the right direction. I would love to just continue getting that therapy treatment, but it's just too pricey. So in meanwhile, I would have to look for someone here locally where I don't have to pay for my monies, but insurance or healthcare, whatever it's called for you guys. And finding the right person for this is a very, very big effort. So last year in summer, I had to wait for like 2 months until I met the therapist that I got. And then I had him for a few weeks, and then he went on vacation, came back, and we had a few more weeks, and that was it. I I had to separate from him because I didn't like him. He made weird jokes when I was selling stuff. He gave me the feeling he didn't care about me. He gave me very bad negative feelings, multiple ones. So I don't think he cared about me at all. I don't think I was in good hands at all. And that was all over a span of like a little more than 4 months. So it's a lot of time. 4 or 5 months, almost half a year. So this process alone of just finding the right person, if you're not paying for it, that's how you pay for it. I think the BetterHelp prices are still fair. As I heard, people would charge up to 80 to $100 per session. Private therapists. But it's just money I don't have in the first place. That is kind of depressing. It's not that I don't want to spend it for this, but where am I gonna get that money? On top of having to pay the laser surgery that I'm getting next week. So I'm in a very rough spot right now. But yeah, as I said, I'm just gonna keep going, keep gonna do what I'm doing, and I think I'm on the right path. The more I get this feeling of the reinforcement, the more I feel mad about the people abandoning me, giving up on me. That easily. That was a great watch. I'm gonna put this one on YouTube for sure. I'm gonna make it like a part 1, part 2 kind of thing. What am I gonna do about my anger towards certain people? I guess this is the question that I want to figure out. Tomorrow we're gonna dive into bipolar and see what that is all about. Never faced me. For me, it's something that has to do with schizo. I don't think I'm schizo. Dealing with these topics, so many buzzwords are being thrown around, especially nowadays. Like on social media, you see everybody is suddenly autistic, everybody has some sort of trauma and stuff. It's losing, the terms are losing their value. At the same time, you can never disregard somebody's feeling, and you have to accept it, But I think a lot of it is just it's like a trend, which I thought about a lot for my case. If I'm just thrown into this now and looking left and right, everything matches, but is it really the thing? So I was like, am I just trying to cope in that way? But nah, this goes deep. It's actually that messed up. It's even more bad. Then you guys will never know. I'm probably never gonna tell all this stuff. It's very graphic, very triggering. This shit messes you up, dude. But everything makes sense now, and I'm just happy I checked it out. I'm proud of myself, as I said before. I know I could have went a whole nother way. A dark, bad, many decisions that I made wrong, I believe. That I could have made wrong. Good thing it was only what it was. I feel robbed of my life, to be honest. I feel robbed of, I would say, my future, but I guess that's in my hands now, huh? That's a tough pill to swallow. I got like so many emotions, and I gotta let this sink big time. How can you do this to a child? To your children? Unbelievable. I think that's it for tonight, guys. I can't cope with anything right now. Can't. It's too much. It's too much. Wish you a good weekend. Come by tomorrow. Tomorrow we're gonna crash some more in The Last of Us. Hopefully I can fix the crashes. I was googling. A lot of people have a issue with crash. So we're gonna figure this out. But not today, tomorrow. We might watch some more stuff from Healthy Gamer. This guy is a saint. We must protect him at all costs. Yeah, anyways, guys, that's it. Thanks for hanging out, and I see you tomorrow. Thank you, GG, thank you, bye!